Hi guys. I hope you hear me well. I'm here to introduce you a new Lemon IO talk, and I want to invite our moderator. Please welcome here. No sound.
Right now, now it is. So, hello everyone. Good morning. Good evening. Thank you for joining us today for this exciting webinar on the use of generative AI and its applications.
Yeah, you're welcome. Stage is yours.
Thank you. My name is Uğur. I'm a technology entrepreneur, co-founder of two AI startups, and working as an assistant professor at Biruni University in Istanbul. And today I'll be moderating this session. And today we have a special guest with us today, Zac, the founder of an innovative startup called Joggr, which is focusing on automating the documentation phase of software development. Using recent LLM-powered approaches, Joggr prepares automated code documents by integrating itself to your Git workflow, I suppose. Yeah. So Zac's going to mention about that. Hi, Zac. Could you please share a brief introduction about your company's mission?
Yeah, thanks for having me and thanks for the introduction. Just a quick recap, Joggr, we're building a documentation platform built specifically for developers, and we're leveraging AI to help with that through automatically keeping your docs up to date, generating content, etc. And that's where I really started my generative AI journey. Give you a quick background so you kind of know who's talking. So been through startups most of my career. I was most recently at FedEx Dataworks, which is like the AI ML wing of FedEx. As a director of platform engineering, I was there via acquisition. I've been through multiple acquisitions, and kind of weirdly also at AI startups. I was head of technology at Precognitive.ai. Now we were using supervised unsupervised learning ML, like traditional machine learning AI, versus the newer kid on the block. I also, in the past life, used narrative science, using NLP to generate content based off of data. This was 10 years ago, though. So I've had a weird collection of experiences related to the topic. So it's kind of came full circle now that I'm starting a company using AI ML.
Awesome. So it's going to be a good talk today, I suppose. So today we have a series of insightful topics to explore during our session, and we will be touching on some of the key issues in the world of LLMs and generative AI in general, possibly. So let's, Zac, begin with our first topic. It's, I wonder, the trust in LLM outputs. So deciding whether to trust LLM outputs can be tricky, and if the task is very important, it might be wise to wait for LLMs to get smarter. And, but for less critical tasks, LLMs can, already be useful.
Yeah.
It's essential to keep checking and improving their performance over time. But that's my perspective. How about from your point of view? Could you please elaborate on the readiness of LLMs and whether we should trust their outputs immediately or wait for another decade or something?
Yeah, so this is, I think I was telling you before the call when we were chatting, my journey with LMs have been very up and down, like mountain, like climb a mountain, fall down the mountain, climb a mountain, fall down the mountain, which kind of relates to the jagged frontier, which I think that was a Stanford researcher, someone coined that. But AI in its current state, generative AI specifically, is really good at certain things, like really good. I wouldn't say 100% trust, but like as close as you can get. And then it's very bad at other things. It's like there's no middle ground. It's usually very good or very bad. Some of the use cases I've seen that work well are like data transformation, from an engineering perspective, data transformation, summarization of content, and Joggr or doing that. So like things like that, I think it does well. But it does hallucinate quite a bit. And if you're not familiar with the term hallucinate, what that's meaning is it tries to fill in the rest of the sentence basically, and it just pulls something based on a weight or a score, and that something is not correct. So a lot of what we've actually done at Joggr is building feedback loops and analysis of the outputs to prevent bad output from reaching a user. I would say most of our work is there, and also prompt engineering, not really in like tuning the models or not even the prompting really. It's more of the protecting the user from bad content from the LLM. So like I would definitely say trust it in certain cases, explore it, but it's not the best at certain things. But there are a lot of things that's really good. So that's kind of how I've looked at it right now. Like any technology, it will continue to improve. These have been coined foundation models too, or at least part of foundation models. I think that's kind of the way I look at it and how I use it is I'm building stuff on top of it, but I'm not using it directly. So that's like if you're just slapping paint on something and proxying directly to ChatGPT, you're gonna have some problems probably.
This is actually what everyone thinks about it, and everyone thinks that it's how it's done, but it's not, right?
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
we can fire up everything as we want. It doesn't have to be a chatbot at all.
Yeah.
Agents.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's funny because we're in the middle of starting to fundraise. And even throughout that, like a lot of VCs, fund investor types, don't quite understand the difficulty of this technology because they just see the user-facing ChatGPT versus the OpenAI, like GPT-4, GPT-3.5, Turbo, etc. They only see that and it's like, oh, I can generate a whole blog post. I'm like, yeah. If you try to use it and generating code or generating content for a doctor's office, you got to be way more careful than your blog post or your LinkedIn post. Unlike other technology in the past, like the big data warehouses, that kind of stuff, the difference with this is the non-technical folks can get their hands on it, play with it, see the magic, and it is magic to them. So they think it's simple to just do this, and that's not the case. I will say though, I don't want to scare people away. I have a lot of really positive things to say about generative AI. It's more just be cautious. Don't be overly optimistic. It's like any technology. I come from a DevOps background. Everyone loved Kubernetes. Everyone was all in on Kubernetes. There's a big movement away from Kubernetes, except for specific use cases for a reason, because it's a very difficult technology to deploy and maintain. So yeah, I think this is in that similar boat, but we're also right at the frontier of this. 5 years from now, God knows where we'll be at.
Exactly. So yeah, we'll be coming back to this topic as well. So moving to our second topic. So privacy concerns of projects which are using especially cloud-based LLMs.
Yep.
So let me describe what I'm going to ask about it. So when using cloud-based LLMs, such as ChatGPT, for documentation generation, or let's say for any specific task, privacy concerns arise due to the sensitive nature of the code or data. So storing code or project-related information in the cloud can or may expose risks if not properly secured.
Right.
And there's also compliance issues. We're going to be also coming back to this topic in the next question. But with data protection regulations, so how can organizations or developers address and should focus on these concerns? What's your opinion on this?
Yeah, so I think if we're taking the compliance piece and setting that aside, so like GDPR, that kind of stuff, set that aside for the next part of this conversation. If I focus purely on the security side, I think two things. The first, I think there's a very strong misconception on the security risks of using a cloud-based LLM, primarily because folks are already pushing data to cloud-based databases. They're already pushing data all these different locations in the cloud, like your cloud provider, your database provider, your caching provider, your queue management system, whatever you're using, right? It's no different with the LLMs. The caveat is, this is prep point number 2, I think there's a huge disconnect because there's been a lot of stories around, oh, IBM leaked sensitive data. That's because they were using ChatGPT, the research tool from OpenAI, not the over the API LLMs. those calls they'll not store that data, they'll not use that data to train. Any of the stuff through the web, I believe they will use. I think you can turn it off. I'm not sure on the set. I don't really use it. So I think you can turn that off. But everything else, though, should be in the same bucket in my mind as those other things from a data security perspective. Does that make sense? Or is that kind of where my head's been at? I've spent a lot of time in security, unfortunately, is my DevOps background. So
that's always an issue for developers. That's also up to us, I think, because this is also, we expose data to these APIs. So it's on us to summarize the data or anonymize the data, whatever, remove the names, remove the sensitive information. Right. Yeah. About the ethical considerations then, other than security,
regular ethical or the compliance, because the compliance is where I think there's actually a bucket of worms. Because that's where, let's say compliance first, because that's where I've put some time and thought into. So the way these LLMs are built, you really can't remove data, which means that if you want to comply with a GDPR request or any of the other regional data privacy regulations, that can be very difficult if that data is in an LLM, or if you have fine-tuned your own LLM using your data, again, that is now in that LLM. There's no way that I am familiar as right now, there's some startups working on it, to remove that data or purge that data. So there is a compliance risk there. I think if you're using the LLMs the way that I've discussed, where the foundation models, the cloud-based LLMs are just your foundation, your starting point. You're not training those, you're not sending data to them other than just your requests. And then you fine tune your own models on top of it. You can control that a bit more. Just you might have to destroy a model and retrain it, which might be expensive. So that's, I think, the difficult part. I can only imagine what OpenAI, Anthropic, and all the other players are going through, because they have this open chat thing that anyone can use and drop data into. That's a huge gray area that I'm not even sure regulators have a way to work through right now. But yeah, that's the caveat in my mind. I think if you're a startup, smaller company, doing your normal stuff, just be smart. Don't send stuff you wouldn't send to, put it this way, don't send stuff to LMs you wouldn't commit to your code base. You're probably fine. Like, you're not storing passwords and emails and phone numbers. And if you are, please remove them from your repository. You should not be storing them there. But that's like kind of how I've thought about it from our perspective.
Definitely. Yeah. We should control the data.
Yeah.
From the beginning. So then let's talk about the other parts in ethical considerations.
Yeah.
Like user adoption. So let me explain. The ethical considerations are, crucial in AI-powered projects, not just in LLMs, but for every application we send data over some, transmission protocol. So it's vital to ensure that, in terms of LLM parts, it's vital to ensure that LLMs are used responsibly, ethically, and by avoiding biases on harmful outputs, or you name it. So there's tons of ideas coming in my mind when talking about this. And as you already mentioned, and regulation compliance is almost as critical as the topic itself. So how does Joggr ensure ethical use of LLM in terms of the whole topic? What do you say?
So this is the interesting part. So whenever I talk to anyone, I did not start an AI company. My co-founder and I, we started a company to build a documentation platform for developers. It just so happens that AI can help us solve some of the problems we were trying to solve with logic, or I'll continue to use the term, the traditional ML route. So that was where generative AI really plugged in for us. That means our surface area and our exposure is significantly less than someone like Copilot. I'll just pick on them. Copilot, their whole product, that whole product is AI. So they have to worry about, that's like everything they're doing, they have to worry about that. But where we have focused most of our time with the AI side is, again, the analysis, the feedback loop. So everything we're doing for AI, everything that's AI related, it's human in the loop. That means a human has to approve said content before it is merged or included in the document. So number one, there's a human involved in that. Number two, we're building out different pieces using a rules engine to kind of run through the outputs through to understand, hey, I can use NLP to determine sentiment without using generative AI. Like we can do different things and kind of get little triggers for us to say, hey, this output was strange, this output was weird. The one other benefit we have is we're working on technical documentation. So we don't have the creative spirit that someone would have writing content for a newspaper or someone else. So our box is a lot smaller to work within, which makes it a lot easier too for us to tweak, tune, and manage that issue on the output side and the usage side. Does that all make sense?
That makes sense from my point of view. So about the comments, let's ask your questions. So yeah, you previously mentioned about the expensiveness of that piece using LLMs over cloud. So about this one, let's transition to our next topic then. I'm wondering, to use AI in our apps, we generally need good computers or lots of engineering work.
Yep.
If you're a non-technical stakeholder, then you have to find someone. So this includes powerful computers, data storage, and spatial processors like GPUs and TPUs.
Right.
We also need to make sure our code runs efficiently and can handle big workloads. So we have to know scalability and robustness things. There are so many concepts for engineering from the engineering side. So when using LLMs, or let's just think about how you spin up Joggr, is it still the same today? Can you share your insights into the infrastructure and engineering resources to make applications AI powered in general?
Yeah. So I mentioned Kubernetes previously. That was where in the past I had leveraged Kubernetes, is managing GPUs, different nodes, to do all those giant, we need to process 5 million records to train the model. That is not the case with LLMs. LLMs are available via an API. So the bucket I would put us in an AI is applied AI. We are not actually building LLMs. I have no interest in doing that. That sounds like I need $1 billion and 500 people. So that's not what we're doing. We are utilizing LLMs as foundation models within our platform. So that means that my only interaction with LLMs for the most part are API based, and then making sure I have a feedback loop where I can store, did a human reject or accept the output of said model. That's the majority of our surface area right now. I think that probably will not grow significantly outside of those protections, like I mentioned, the rules engine. That's all code. It's not new instances I have to run. I'm not spending millions of dollars. Our cloud spend right now is nothing right now. We're serverless, so it's very low. So that's kind of the beauty of the new paradigm that we've seen in the AI space, that you don't have to have a lot of money to start using it, which is great. I mean, I don't even think we've given OpenAI more than a couple $100 at this point, probably, just because we don't have enough usage. We're in a closed beta, but yeah, I mean, even if we're having millions of developers, I don't think our spend would be even close to what I was spending when we were training models the old way.
The old way.
I know.
I'm thinking in the same way, and I also think that we should, always locate ourselves at some place where we use LLMs, other than selecting a specific language model base, whether it is ChatGPT or Llama or Cloud or whatever it is. But when it comes, it is our limitation. The money part is our limitation. But there's also another limitation from the LLM part. It's the token limit. So managing projects with extensive code bases beyond token limit is a common challenge.
Yeah.
It's the reality as well. And we have token limits in these infrastructures. So when we're dealing with huge amounts of data, it can be tough. And what are possible solutions? We can break the code into smaller pieces, focus on the most important parts maybe, and maybe use smart tools or again LLMs to summarize the information to send them again. And we also need to make sure our code stays high quality and runs well. So I'm coming to my question at this point. Many projects have extensive code bases. You always encounter them. So how do we manage projects beyond token limits, Zach? Any practices to handle such cases on your side? What do you do?
So you're saying token limits on our product?
That's right. LLMs have this limit, but our products have thousands of lines of code. So how do you keep update everything?
So I'll tell you where we're at and where we're heading. I think that will kind of paint the picture of how we're working around this. Number one, I have zero intent of ever sending an entire code base to LLM. That will never happen. It's not happened. I will not do that. That's not going to happen. The way we're going about it currently is we are integrated into GitHub, so we can see changes within pull requests. So unless the developer really dislikes the rest of their team, is opening a PR with hundreds of file changes, we can really work within a small amount of code that we're sending to get transformed, fixed, repaired, generate documentation, whatever it is, right? Now, as we're getting farther along, what we're going to actually do is leverage semantic search and index people's code base up front. So that's like, it's technically sending it to like OpenAI or Vertex AI or one of the AI competitors to get the, oh my God, got the name of the output. The numerical data that comes from, I forget, it slipped my mind, but the data you would send like a WeaveV8, for example. That will be like, hey, search for get user. It'll pull back, hopefully, the get user function and also related functions that are named similarly. If you're familiar with semantic search, it should pull back that data, and then we can use that to generate documentation, etc. It's also a way for us to map out how code bases are connected. So we can kind of in a more a fuzzier way than you would if you were doing static analysis, say, hey, this function is related to this function. You can't really tell because we're not trained on any specific language, but they're named very similar in a similar way, and the content's also similar to a certain degree, or how it's being used. So that's where we're heading towards. But right now, actually, we're very much more focused on helping people summarize documents, summarize code, walk through code, autocomplete when they're typing, Copilot for docs kind of stuff. Like that kind of thought process, I think aligns more with our vision, because we don't want to use generative AI as a bulldozer. It's more of a hammer in the tool belt that we can use when needed. There's a lot of stuff our users won't even use it because they don't need it. They can just write the docs using a template that we've built, and it's fast, and it's faster than trying to type out a prompt or all the other stuff that might come along with that from an AI perspective.
I agree with that.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. So let's continue with the general use cases before diving into the detail about Joggr. So LLMs can do many different things. As you mentioned, it's just like 25 minutes, but we already talked about so many use cases, what LLMs can do. So in many different fields. So they can write content, understand what we're saying, help us make decisions. For example, in healthcare, they help with research and patient data. In finance, they catch fraud and help with customer support. They're also used in things like writing chatbots and code documentation from your case. So I can't count them in here in one hour session. So many interesting applications which are possible with generative AI are not even in the horizon yet today. So let's explore a few real-world use cases of LLM and LLM-powered applications, other than your current experience. What could be possible use cases if you get everything into your mind and possibly mix it and just a brainstorming? What possibly can we do by using LLMs other than chatbots?
I'm laughing because I pictured my number one use case. I actually don't use ChatGPT. I use Claude from Anthropic quite a bit, but primarily for naming. Programming, they say the two hardest things are naming and cache invalidation or caching. Naming stuff's a pain. So a lot of times I'll put in, it's doing this, does this, give me a name for this class, this function, this module, and it pops out some names. That's great, I'll use that. Or we have open source stuff that I want to be a little bit more whimsical. Like I love Lemon.io's branding, by the way. That's like kind of where we're trying to head towards. So we'll find funny names that way for our open source, or whimsical, not really funny. But I think what I'm getting at with that is the LLMs are really good at being an extension of your creativity. So if there's something creative you're trying to do and you need ideas, I would definitely go leverage LLM for that. That could be naming for like, hey, I need ideas for a blog post. I need ideas for something else. That's a great personal use case. If you're moving more towards like an application level use case, I've seen a couple companies doing some pretty interesting stuff. Can't remember their names off the top of my head, but one, they're using LLMs to create structured data from documents. So not only like engineering documentation, but medical documentation, any kind of documentation possible, their general use, but they can pull that out and then put that into a database that you can query, or an API that you can then query. They can do different things about like finding related documents, et cetera, duplicates. Stuff that I think is really interesting, because basically you're taking an output and transforming it to a new thing. And that's where I think a lot of what the LLMs are good at right now, like pretty really solid at, is the transform from A to B. So like transform a function from Python to JavaScript. It will do that very well. I've not seen it really screw that up. So there's a lot of applications there. Or on the engineering side, one that I would love to see someone do is automatically generating tests, either IDE tests or full unit tests, somewhere, some variation of those. Because you have very defined output and it can generate, or sorry, input, and it can generate an output based on that very defined input. That's where I think a lot of the use cases I've seen are more the transformation, like from A to B, or that extension of creativity. The last one is the one that we're using the most of the things that I've talked about, is summarization. So if you have like a 4-page document, you want to have a summary of it, those tools are pretty good at that. Right out of the box, they're pretty good at that. And there are even models that are specifically trained, like at Vertex AI, they have in their model garden, they have one specifically trained for summarization. So that's like another application that I think is super helpful. Some other applications I'm interested in that are more the generative side, that are not in my technical wheelhouse. I'm very much a technologist. My experience has been purely in tech startups for the last decade. My wife's actually a psychologist, and there's a lot of paperwork around documenting cases, testing, etc. A lot of it's relatively boilerplate, or like taking the bullet point list and putting it into an abstract that's in written form, in a professional doctor written form, whatever. That I think is a use case that's super interesting. Now I know there's someone that asked about medical data. That could be a huge can of worms in every country, not only in the European Union, because the United States has their own laws around that. So that would be something someone would have to really work on to solve. But I think that's also an interesting use case, is basically where there's a lot of, how do I call it, manual labor delivering content when it's not 100% necessary to get the information. So like lawyers, they'll create a legal brief or something. If you ever read a contract, sorry all the lawyers on the call if there are any, it's like watching paint dry. It's like the worst. Like I hate reading contracts. They're terrible. It's always this very long, overly worded thing, but it's necessary because of contract law. But could we generate contracts? Could we say, hey, I need a contract that does XYZ within the United States or within Slovenia or some Croatia, like a place that I'm not even from or do business in? Can I get a contract that's written in Croatian, which is another thing we should probably talk about. LLMs are very English centric, but written in Croatian that follows the local laws in that county or something, right? So there's some interesting use cases there that I'd love for some folks to tackle, especially as a startup. I hate having to pay lawyers loads of money to generate an MSA or an
That's a
NDA
really
or something. So sorry, lawyers again.
But that's the reality today. And let me add two more topics about it. So it doesn't have to be always text-based.
Yeah.
Videos and images are out there, and there are a few companies, at least as far as I know, who are utilizing images from and transforming them to tokens, so that they can use those images and maybe video content or maybe sounds along with LLM background, and then create some inference out of them, understand contexts as well.
Yeah.
Go ahead, please.
I'll say my focus has been LLMs because I'm in a documentation startup. Most of what we're doing is written word, either code or some kind of language, right? But the image side really interests me because foundation models, the way they were coined at Stanford, is not only LLMs. It's doing images, video, audio, anything that foundation level, which LLMs can be a part of, can be used to do different things or applied things on top of it. And the image stuff I'm interested in, not only for like is this a cat or not a cat, right? The whole thing. But also there are other use cases. Like at Precognitive.ai, we were doing unsupervised learning. We would generate images. I forget the model we were using to generate it based on the mapping of the data, store that, and then we could actually analyze those images in real time to get back data to add to our fraud score. It seems insane talking about it, but it's like it actually, like we experimented with it. I think there's some paper we leveraged. And it actually was relatively successful. So there are use cases that researchers, probably like yourself, are going to find pulling all these pieces together, especially when you get into the image, the other forms, the other mediums, imagery, video, audio. And audio, going to get started on the whole like copyright with music stuff. I have no involvement in that, but that's like wild, the stuff I'm hearing where people are generating songs from Drake without his involvement, which is interesting to me.
Exactly. And yeah, at the end of the day, it's all about transformers and attention.
Yeah.
Everything is probably convertible to those matrices or vectors. So if we turn them into vectors, then we're all good to go.
Vectors. That's what I was looking for. The semantic search. I couldn't think of the. Thank you. Should ask the AI researcher.
Right. Yeah. And my personal use case lately, I've been, from my academic background, I also, I'm trying to read a lot of research papers, and it's sometimes, maybe always, I don't know, always hard to follow up with the research papers. They, tell something, they claim that they are doing something, but you have two choices. Just go and implement their suggestions, and find yourself in a circle where you can't go outside. Nothing out there. Or maybe you can just first understand what they are doing and how or why they are doing this. Maybe then you can come up with an idea if this is a good idea to implement their solution or not. But lately I've been using those LLM powered applications, let's not name them here, to ask questions about those papers and understand why they're in this space, what is the expected output, etc. That's my personal use case, but very powerful. I can read maybe tens of, not 20s, but 10 paper at a day. It's a huge improvement from understanding side.
That is definitely where we're sitting with the summarization piece. Is you already can see companies like Google doing it, where they're combining their search, which is probably semantic search or some form of it under the hood, combining with generative AI to generate summarizations of the results, which I think is fantastic because there's a lot of times where you have to dig through 4 documents to get the answer you want. Even if the search is really good, it might just be the documents are interrelated and it's not really obvious they are. They're built by different people, etc. So getting that information of like, oh, it's doing this, it does this, use this document, it just solves all the work you would have to do to get to that point. Just like if pre-Google or pre-search, you had to go to Yahoo or something and scroll through links and then start diving through the internet to find something. I don't know if anyone remembers that, but that is kind of where I think we're heading, is from the wall of links to search, semantic search plus summarization with generative AI, to the point of where you write a Google search, there's no results. You just get your answer and you leave. And that's kind of one of the things we're thinking about documentation is, if we have all your documents indexed and your code base indexed, could you ask us a question? We answer, like, how do I deploy a prod? We know you're an engineer on XYZ team using this code base. We can infer which app you mean, pull the documentation, some of the code, answer it. So instead of having to spend an hour and a half digging through it to figure it out, 10 minutes later you're deploying. I think that's kind of what you're saying with the research papers is, instead of reading hundreds of papers, you can filter out the ones that you don't care about or aren't really relevant to you, get summarizations of the ones that are relevant, and then double click into the ones that you really, really want to get into, which I think is powerful for sharing knowledge collaboration. I think it's going to be a great thing overall.
Yeah, that's the point, actually. It's like digital transformation is currently happening against previous, meaning of digital transformation.
Yep.
Those challenges as well. So, and there are so many ideas that, someone come up with an idea and use LLMs or general generative AI topics to power their ideas and, make them live in maybe a few days.
Yep.
The thing here is that I really liked a sentence from one of your previous talks. You said that state-of-the-art AI is available over an API. So we talked about the expensiveness. We talked about the cloud resources. We talked about the engineering power that requires, for us to have these applications go live. But the reality is that it's now being used over an API.
Right.
It's feasible from your side as well. So,
yeah, I think if you look at what Anthropic, OpenAI, Google, AWS, whatever they're doing themselves, they're trillion-dollar companies. But those startups that are generating or building the LLMs, they have raised outrageous amounts of money, even prior to being released. And I think if anyone knows, and I'm sure you know, the reason is it's super expensive. All these LLMs are trained on the same data corpus, basically the internet. And a lot of what their teams are doing are filtering the data, pass it to the model, test the output, filter data, pass the kind of the similar stuff you've done with other ML, just slightly different. But yeah, it's super expensive. The beautiful thing for all of the folks in the more engineering side versus the data science or AI side is we get access to all that $1 billion of work for like 0.001 cents per API call or something on average, probably, right? And I can just set up an API and do it super, like with Versal AI, their little AI thing they released. You can set up full AI prompting everything directly in an app like overnight. And I think that the power of that is phenomenal and has opened doors for a lot of folks to add AI in different use cases for their specific technology product, whatever they're working on. So yeah, I think there's a lot of power there that you would not have gotten in the past. Like, I'll give an example from my previous experience. At Precognitive, I would say 75 to 85% of our spend was like cloud spend was training models, even though we were processing, I think it was like millions of transactions a minute or a second, some variation of a lot of data. So we're working with like one of the largest banks in Europe, other stuff like that, right? So we had a lot of data coming in, but training the models was still our most expensive. Not our servers that we're running, not our databases. Bigtable was still not even that expensive for us. It was the spinning up the GPUs, building all of our ML models, our supervised, unsupervised learning, anomaly detection stuff. Like all of that was where all of our spend was at, which is why we did it so, like we didn't do it as often because we were scared to spend the money when the results were already good enough. With this, you don't have to do that out of the box. You can do a lot of work just on the prompting side, on the like prompt engineering, when it's familiar with that. You can do a lot of work there that gets you good results without having to fine tune the model. that's one of the things that surprised me with this is I thought we were going to have to fine tune models to get like decent results. And it was no, as long as we are very specific and limited in our scope, and we really leverage a lot of the prompt engineering techniques like the not zero shot, chain of thought, those kind of different things that you can leverage within your application helped us save a lot of money. So like I said, OpenAI spend is like nothing right now. We're spending more for, I think, our email provider than OpenAI right now.
Yeah, let the other guys spend millions for us.
Right. Let them do it. We'll all benefit from it.
Yeah. So until now, what we're talking is almost the normal flow of day for us. It's normal for us. But how about the other people who are non-technical or who are newcomers? They act like, wow, how's that possible? But it's possible. From our side, it's a normal one. Just, as we talked about, it's matrices, vectors, and the composition of them.
Yeah.
Or multiplication, whatever. So
it's math.
Yeah.
It's math.
With the latest AI results, we can read research papers, attend conferences, maybe follow podcasts, join email newsletters. There are so many good of them. Maybe get involved in online groups. We can also use AI-powered third-party applications or tools to, those keeping us with their notifications and make us always up to date.
Yep.
Maybe taking online courses and working with others on projects that help us, stay in the loop. So keeping up with the AI improvement is crucial, not just for us, for almost everyone who is dealing with AI. So in your side, from your point of view, how do you stay up to date about recent topics in AI? How to make yourself comfortable about leading an AI startup in this very dynamic environment? Because tomorrow, you don't know what's going to happen, but you're leading the way. So what's your preference on, when it comes to becoming a survival in this space? I should also ask this to myself since I'll be joining the founders very soon, but I'm actually already there. But since it's not public yet today, it's your turn, Zach, to answer this.
So first off, I'll again reiterate, like, we're not an AI company. We're a documentation platform developers that uses AI. So that's the one benefit is I'm not always having to keep my finger on the pulse with AI. I'm as involved in like the documentation space. I've gone so deep into the Markdown. I know probably every library ever written that helps you with Markdown translations, etc. As far as the AI side, there's a couple newsletters I follow. I try to keep up with like TechCrunch, the other ones you'd expect, like the Y Combinator boards, etc. But I think the times I've learned the most are just experimenting. And I still use, like I said, I'll mention their names, I don't care, Claude. I'll use that, but I will apply prompt engineering techniques to my queries. So like if I was to try to, I did this last night, generate a name for an open source project we're working on. I ran through, like, I forget which technique I was using off the top of my head. I might just did it naturally, but basically I listed out a prompt, a bunch of information around the subject matter, another prompt, and then I basically went back and forth with it until I generated a list of 25 names. We rolled down to 5 names. So I was actually leveraging those techniques while doing it normally, like as an engineer, which also forced me to go find information on those techniques. Like there's a great one. I can pull it up and drop it into the chat. Give me a second. Apparently this will me to connect to YouTube, but it's called promptingguide.ai. They have a pretty, I can't actually edit the chat. We can share it out via email after, but promptingguide.ai, a lot of great examples, good explanations. Just reading through that honestly helped. But yeah, I think the hard thing for me on this subject is I'm at a startup and I'm running from fire to fire. So like keeping my finger on the pulse, I'm doing naturally more than on purpose. There's less intent behind it than I would probably like. We have 100 engineers and I'm CTO, not coding anymore, which I'll probably cry if that happens, but say that happens, I'll probably need to be a bit more in tune with everything's going on versus just naturally having it happen because I'm doing the work.
Right.
So I do want to say time check. We do have like a couple of questions. We want to get to those when they have 15 minutes left, right?
Yeah, we will go through some of the questions, but just before going through the questions, I have one last question for you today. So let's shift our focus to Joggr's journey. How do you measure documentation effectiveness within your product?
How are we measuring effectiveness of the documentation?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So this is interesting because this is something that we're doing. It's a bit unique in my mind from the AI. Are you asking general documentation or AI generated documentation? Sorry.
AI generated documentation.
Yeah, because we also people are handwriting documents. They're still doing that. It's a documentation platform for devs. AI just helps.
They may provide you with some, draft documentation phases for their applications or their specific code bases. But when it comes to your site, your end, how do you measure if your result is correct or not?
Because of my experiences at Precognitive, which was a AI startup doing fraud prevention using behavioral data, we're leveraging some of the same techniques that I developed and learned about at Precognitive. So, for example, there's always the human in the loop feedback, like good, bad, right? That's a normal thing you see in a lot of the AI platforms. Was this helpful or not? Was this not helpful? But I think behavior and actions actually tell you more. So if there's a document, so we'll just walk through a scenario. I generate a document purely with AI based off some code. What we're then doing is we'll track how much did you edit the document? How much did you commit it, right? Did you save it, whatever? And of the edits, were they substantive? Were they just small little things, or did you rewrite entire sections? That's on the creator side. On the reader side, we'll be tracking how often they're viewing the documents, how long they spend in the document. And what's interesting with the length, there's actually a curve, almost like a bell curve to a certain degree, where it's too little time, they're bouncing, too much time, the documentation sucks. So it's got that middle area that we're starting to develop some thresholds for. So taking all that behavioral data and then putting that into a way that we can actually analyze the effectiveness of a document. And that could be a score or a rating or something, some other metric. I won't get into the IP details, so I see it doesn't get pissed, but that's how we're tracking that from a high level. And I think that's actually probably going to work for most things that are generated, is not only relying on the human's input, but their behavior. Because I think behavior is actually a better marker, a better measure for the success of whatever you've generated.
Perfect. So before closing this session, let's go through some of the questions then. Let me paraphrase them. So one question is that it says, someone LLM stuck with one answer and start to recurse to this answer over and over and again. Is there any prompt recommendations to get out of this loop without changing the logic of the question? What's your opinion on this?
Okay, so you're saying that you prompt it and it gives you the answer blue. You say, no, that's wrong. It said, no, but it's blue. So that's to reply that,
yeah,
right?
is there prompt tricks for this?
Yeah, so the first thing that comes to mind is the easiest thing to do, but also risky depending on what you're doing, is tweak the temperature. So you can actually get a little bit more creativity from the output. If you have a very, low temperature, maybe you can help me with this. If it's low or high, I can't remember which one is more creative or less creative. RTFM, I need to read the docs, but tweak that temperature. If it's at a certain point where it's not going to be super creative, it'll give you a relatively deterministic answer. But if you change that and tweak that, it'll become more non-deterministic, aka it'll start to generate new information. If that makes sense. The other thing is too is try to diagnose why that your prompt is outputting that. The LLMs, all they're doing at a high level, this is my understanding because I'm not a data scientist, did not build these things, is there's like the sky is blank. It tries to pick the next best word based on a weighting. And that weighting is generated from the data that's input to that model, to that neural net. So there's something with those first words of that prompt that are forcing that thing to always come back that way. The weights are just so high. And that's why tweaking the temperature could help. The other thing too is I don't know what kind of prompt you're using. I'd have to understand more. But if you're using a zero shot, like just a single one prompt question, maybe try some of the engineering prompt techniques a little bit different. For example, give it a prompt, say, I want you to do this. Here's an example of an output. Here's another example of an output. Here's another example of an output with prompt and output that you hand build, and then have them generate the prompt. That might also tweak the weightings and improve the outputs from the LLM.
Right, exactly. And the next question is, well, yeah, we have already talked about it a bit, but it says, how do you see generative AI evolving over the next decade in the context of software development? And does generic LLM get better with specific topics or niches, highly tailored system wins?
I think LLM's gonna be like the cloud. There will be big players that have the foundation where you deploy your apps, like the big models, right? The OpenAI's, Anthropic's, Vertex AI from Google, etc. Then there'll be a crap load of applied companies on top of that. For example, like if you think like a Versal or someone like that, I'm sure they're using every cloud provider, but they're providing an abstract on top of it to make it simpler for folks to leverage and use. And that's what I think will happen is there'll be more and more applied AI companies to simplify and be highly tailored to niche systems. It's like we're like the legal law LLM provider API SDK. You use our APIs, we can analyze legal docs for you, but then you can build that into your legal documentation platform, for example. I also think as we continue to train and researchers go deeper and deeper into how to leverage these technologies, we're gonna have a lot better idea of how to use them, more concrete patterns, and they will continue to improve.
Right. The next question is from Mustafa. He says, when I apply the recommendation tactics to develop ChatGPT prompts for my project, sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't, as expected. Do you also encounter such a situation? If so, what do you do?
Yeah. So I think it depends on the use case. I don't know the use case here, so I can't help answer that. If you limit your surface area as much as possible, that helps. The other thing I have done is we do not currently allow anyone to prompt in our system outside of one use case. Sorry, when you're generating a whole document, but the prompt they have is like 3 words. The prompt we write is like, I don't know, like 3 paragraphs or even some predefined stuff that we've already added to the settings for the model. That way you limit the surface area that the end user who's going to just start writing crazy wild things, because users do that will help you on that end. Now, if this is you directly trying to do the prompt engineering, I don't know. I think the best thing is just keep trying different tactics, limit your surface area, tweak the temperature too. If you want a more deterministic answer, just tweak that temperature to the point where it's always giving you the right answer, or at least close enough, right? The other thing we've done is we've been very frank with our users, like in the platform and when we're talking to them, that this technology can generate content just like Copilot can generate code. I am sure no one is using Copilot blindly, generating the code and going on with their lives. If they're doing that, that's scary because Copilot's wrong quite a bit. So, or GitHub Copilot specifically. So always check that and just add warnings, labels, different things to help guide people to that right decision if they're accepting or denying the prompt. I hope that answers that. I don't know if I had enough information and context, but that's my high level.
So we have 2 more questions and then we can finish. The first one is from Abdul Kadir. He says, what do you think about the reliability of generating medical data? How can these data can be assessed or evaluated?
Well, 2 things. I think number one, at least within, I am most familiar with the US-based medical system, which is super segmented, separated. There's no communication. Like, screw LLMs. Just get it so that like I don't have to put my family history down every time I go to the doctor. That's crazy to me. There should be like a system that does that. So connecting that data, I think, is one thing. There's also, like I mentioned, with like the psychology, there are a lot of different fields in the medical space that have a lot of regulation around the amount of documentation that has to be generated. So I think that is a field that is ripe for that. Like a doctor, oh God, who was the company? He was a French entrepreneur. I can't remember his name, but this is actually in the French medical system. But doctors in France spend like 45 or 55% of their time writing documentation, and they hate it. And actually, the more you increase the documentation, the more unhappy they are, to the point they'll quit. So if they're spending 90% of their time with patients, which is what they want to do, helping people, and 10% with documentation, I think that's great. I think that's a great use case for that. Anything that's like legal compliance related. So like law, politics. I'm not saying AI should write our laws, but I think like a brief on a law maybe, right? Medical stuff, psychology related stuff, those kind of things I think are really applicable, and I'm really interested to see what happens there. It's not my wheelhouse, but I hope to be a consumer that benefits from it at some point.
We will be there at some point. If not next year, maybe the following year.
I hope so.
We can't escape from this. So our last question is from Omid. He says, today we require cloud infrastructure or really big and expensive GPUs. That's the reality we talked about. So he says, how do we leverage LLMs but on smaller edge devices?
So I think if I'm understanding this, what you don't want to do is make a network request to one of the big OpenAI, whatever those are. If that's the case, I can't, this is the problem. I know all this information, I still have it written down. It's like in GitHub, but if I look at my GitHub stars, I'm sure I could find it. But there was a startup or a small company that was working on LLMs for devices that you could embed within a device. It was smaller, hyper-focused niche on what they were doing. But I think there are going to be applications like that where you can take a model that is hyper-tuned, fine-tuned, whatever, and put that on a device. Also, devices to a certain degree are getting better and better about what they can handle from a RAM, from a storage perspective. If you're talking about putting it like in Cloudflare or something, go look at their documentation. They might already be working on it. I bet they are. Because everyone wants the fastest responses possible, the fastest everything possible. Yeah, that's my thought on that. That's about training. I would not train on the edge. So I don't like, unless you're trying to train on a device itself while the person's inputting something, that could be interesting. But I don't know exactly how to do that. That's getting a bit out of my wheelhouse.
That's right. And let me add something on top of this from the engineering perspective. There are some quantization techniques for, especially developed for LLMs. So you can quantize the model and get a smaller footprint or resource requirements out of that model. That somehow or slightly decreases the performance in terms of accuracy, but increases the performance in terms of speed up. So we can maybe, try out those models, but maybe in the following months, they're going to be out of everywhere. I don't know. So, I guess, which we have one more question before close up. Which latency is normal? How it's dependent on 13 billion or 7 billion models?
This feels like a very specific question, but so I'm not really going to answer because I don't know. But as far as latency with the models, so one of the things we're actually doing, which I didn't talk about, is we do not send one request to OpenAI. So like if we're building a whole document from scratch, I think it's like 15 or 20 different API requests to the models for different sections of the document. Because all of our documentation is structured, built on templates, etc., which is intentional, so we can do stuff like that. So that's one way to do that, is chop the prompts up into multiple. Most of the technologies that exist too, you can do multiple prompts back and forth and continue the conversation. There's like an IDE you can use. That way you don't have to have a user sitting there waiting for 3 minutes for it to generate the whole thing, right? You can even start to render some of the stuff that was already there, just like you see in ChatGPT, where it's starting to type. That is just, that typing is a user facade for how slow those things are. That's the only reason. So they can stream the data back as it's coming versus waiting till the end. So that would be one thing I would say is don't try to wait till the end and chop up your requests if you can.
Well, yeah. So this is probably the end for today.
Yep.
Thank you for sharing your thoughts on every topic.
Hi. One moment, just to remind, like, let's to choose the best question to give the present from Lemon.io. Maybe, Zac,
Okay.
the best question, just to choose the lucky ones.
So I'll pick the first question that was asked only because it's about the medical data, because I want to solve that problem for me, please. So
the first one, this one.
Yeah.
This one. Okay, cool.
Yeah, so please solve that. Please fix that. The medical system, especially in the United States, is very broken still. So, and I know like in Germany, it's extremely bureaucratic. France, I'm guessing similar. Like everyone could use this in some way. So please go solve it.
Guys, thank you for your time. It was like super helpful for our developers. We had a lot of questions, and see you on next Lemon.io Talk.
Yep. Thank y'all.
See you. Bye. Take care.